So kia ora koutou. Thank you for joining this Thought Leadership webinar with the Wellington Regional Leadership Committee. I'm going to start with a karakia timatanga. Mori aho, mori tu. Mori ora, kia tātou, haumi e hui e, tā iki e. And the meaning of that, for those who may not be familiar, is life force awaken, life force stand tall, life force all wellness, good health, and for all join together and unite. The group is ready to progress for the purpose of coming together. So good afternoon. It's the afternoon here in New Zealand. It's the morning for Grant. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. We're extremely lucky to have Grant Ennis with us today, who's written what I think is one of the most important books out today. It is in many ways a scientific issue and a social issue that we're talking about today. So with Grant's book, Dark PR, he deep dives into tools and tactics used by big corporations today for profit at the cost of the future of our planet. So a bit about Grant. Grant's the author of Dark PR, How Corporate Disinformation Undermines Our Health and Environment. Grant has more than 20 years experience in international humanitarian affairs, environmental policy, and public health. He's a distinguished alumni of both the University of the Pacific and Middlebury Institute of International Studies. And Grant lectures at Monash University and is being increasingly sought after for op-eds around the world. So we're really lucky to get some time with him before he skyrockets. So over to you, Grant.
Thanks a lot, Frida. And I just want to give a couple of thanks to some other people before I start. Thanks very much to Kim Kelly, the director of the Wellington Regional Leadership Committee, to Bridget. Finally got to have you on the line. Thanks for coming. Some other friends that are here today, and a big kira ora kotu to everybody on the line. Really a pleasure to be speaking in New Zealand for the first time, if not actually physically present there. I'll share my screen now. Frida asked me to speak today about my book, Dark PR, and also kind of how it fits in the New Zealand context, so that we could have a conversation together about New Zealand, dark PR, and some of the issues that I cover in the book. In the book, I cover diabetes, global warming, and road death. And I look at how corporate disinformation is covering up those kinds of issues, and then how corporate efforts to rig our legislative systems and our land use laws have led to a decreased power within civil society. And we'll go over that in a little bit. But today, because of the amount of time that we have available, I'm really going to focus on the roads lobby, and I'm going to focus on the way that the roads lobby presents information to us in ways that empower them and harm our health, which is kind of a new way of me to present this content. But I think it's particularly useful to this audience because I know you all are dealing in many ways with transportation and land use planning, and I thought we could have a very interesting discussion from there. I wanted to start though by saying, with global problems in New Zealand and around the world, it feels sometimes as if civil society and governments aren't even trying. This is a diagram that I put together last night based on the most recent data from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, where they're calculating explicit and implicit subsidies to fossil fuels. And this is their projection from 2020 to 2025 and includes I think the up-to-date data up to 2022. And as you can see, these subsidies are increasing every year. They've increased dramatically in the last 20 years. So as what we call civil society, we've been trying to stop global warming over the last 20 plus years. Every year the subsidies grow. So our taxes every year go towards paying more for global warming. If you look at, this is a page from my book where I've calculated and put on this diagram here, the top 25 countries and the global figures for these subsidies. Globally, we subsidize fossil fuels 5.9 trillion per year. It's probably 6 trillion even by 2023, because this is 2021 data. And these numbers are projected to increase. So we're paying for global warming, but it's not just global warming. We're also paying through tax subsidies, direct subsidies, implicit subsidies, explicit subsidies for a number of global and local problems. This is a diagram showing tax subsidies to Australian ultra-processed food and beverage producers. I worked with a friend of mine, James Mackey. He's the Lieutenant Governor for South Australia. And we put together this chart. It's 5 billion Aus dollars a year are spent through tax subsidies to junk food producers. There's a diabetes epidemic in Australia. Why are we subsidizing junk food? It makes no sense until you calculate in lobbies and corruption and these kinds of things, which we'll talk about pretty soon. But all of this to kind of say and touch on something that Frida told me. Frida said to me, Grant, one of the things that always comes up is we don't have the money, we don't have the resources. And I think the way that I took all of these global issues in my book and when we came at it was we need to think subtractively. We need to look at how we have these problems today because of existing policies that are recreating and reinforcing them. But people have a problem with thinking subtractively. And a recent study in the journal that was published in the journal Nature does a very good job of highlighting what's called additive solutions bias. So if you look at this little Lego right here, you could ask a bunch of people, how do we make this Lego stand flat? And 90% of people would say you need to add a piece. You could add a piece under the orange block, but you could just as easily, without adding anything, remove the green block on the right. So you don't need any extra blocks to solve that puzzle. And yet humans are biased against that kind of solution, just as we're biased against the idea of approaching ending diabetes by ending the subsidies to the foods that give us diabetes, or ending global warming by ending the subsidies that are causing global warming. We have problems with that. And because of that, because we're unaware of how we could solve a problem by removing things, we allow for this kind of cycle of perverse subsidies to continue. So in terms of the roads lobby, which I'm going to be talking a lot about today, there's a system that happens in every country around the world. I've worked in over 30 countries. I've lived in 10, and I see this everywhere. You have governments contracting private sector builders, and those private sector builders build roads or build highways, they build whatever, but then they take some of that money, the profits, to lobby politicians for more contracts. So it becomes a vicious cycle where you're getting pressure to build more roads by the people you've contracted to build the first roads. And this cycle then leads to more roads than you actually need, more automobile dependency. And quite disturbingly, the and roads industry itself has itself called this the magic circle. So this is the asphalt industry's, I think it's I can't read on the screen and the resolution's not high enough, but I think it's 1966 April issue of this magazine called Asphalt in the United States. And they call this the magic circle. I'm not going to read the text on the screen, but it's essentially the government gives you a contract for some asphalt, you lay the asphalt, you use your profits to lobby for more asphalt. Over and over again, this disturbing magic circle. And this roads lobby is everywhere. And I think a lot of people are really completely aware of how powerful it is because it's so deeply ingrained in every economy on Earth because of the way we do roads contracting and the amount of sectors that are really involved in it. So it's been called the motorist lobby, the highway lobby. Recently, you had a journalist in the United States, I think he's in the UK, Carlton Reid called it the highway auto petroleum complex. There's this one quote in the middle here that I like. I like the beginning of it quite a lot. It says, if you had to design the structure of an effective interest group, one could do no better than model it after the highway lobby. And it's absolutely the case. New Zealand, India, Thailand, United States, Brazil, Canada, UK. You've got this everywhere. It's an incredibly powerful lobby, and it's influential on every level of government. There's just so much money being exchanged by so many hands that they're constantly pushing on us to build more and more roads, which makes us dependent on automobiles. It makes us more likely to drive. It contributes to the loneliness pandemic around the world, car crash deaths, global warming, you name it. Here is a diagram from a book by Mick Hammer called Wheels Within the Wheels, where he shows the connections between all of the road lobby interest groups and specific companies and industries in the UK. He made two versions of this book, one in the 70s and one in the 80s, and I believe this is from the first one. We'll have to distribute these slides later for any of you that are interested in looking at this more and understanding this, or you could read my book as well. But this one is from Mick Hammer's Wheels Within Wheels. And it does a great job of underscoring how powerful and everywhere this industry is, this lobby is. Here's another diagram. I can send the source out later showing the tentacles of this lobby and how it's just everywhere. So the question really comes, why does this continue to persist, and why does nobody deal with this? Why have we not solved this problem? Why have we not resolved this corruption? And the answer really is dark PR. It's devious framing. It's we've got a really good job being done by all of these large organizations, large industries, to hire exceptional PR companies and reframe debates. So in my book, I came up with a cross-industry playbook of 9 devious frames, which I go to show are apply to everything, all kinds of global issues. On this diagram here, this is a page from my book. You can see there's 9 frames, and then I cover the 3 areas of my book and how they're used. But maybe for global warming, I'll just quickly go through them. And then I'll go through a couple more as they pertain to the roads lobby. So for global warming, we all know the first frame is denialism, climate denialism. For the second form of devious framing, those post-denialism. Not a lot of people see this as much, but it is out there and it's pretty crazy. It's a hotter world is a better world because plants will thrive. I could send you some very crazy sources on that if anybody's interested. The number 3 is normalization. So in the mid-90s, some PR groups in the United States found that climate change was a term that was more likely to normalize the issue of global warming. So if right-wing politicians and industries started saying climate change instead of global warming, they found that people would be less likely to be politically active to fight for legislative change. Yale recently, some researchers at Yale recently recreated that study and confirmed the results. Climate change is a term that really reduces people's interest in political action. Silver boomerangs, this is in the case of global warming, energy efficiency. The more energy efficient you make refrigerators, the larger the refrigerators people buy. If you make cars more energy efficient, people drive them further. Energy efficiency is quite a devious frame. Magic, carbon capture. We all know that carbon capture is a scam. Treatment, focusing on adapting to climate change, to global warming, rather than fighting global warming to stop it from happening further. That's the treatment frame. Victim blaming. We all know that British Petroleum invented the concept of the carbon footprint. Has been working to individualize global warming. The final 2 are a little bit tougher for people to stomach sometimes. Knotted web. You have industry around the world saying that any given issue is so complex, it's circular, it's systemic, we'll never be able to solve it. And then multifactorial is the only way we could solve a problem is if we try a combination of solutions. So I'll quickly go over how some of these pertain to issues created by the roads lobby. But before I do, I want to talk about the way, and this is quite a pivot here. I'm going to want to present some new material. There's a tendency for people to believe that misinformation, disinformation, dark PR, propaganda exists because they're viral. That this information gets out into the blogosphere, the social media spaces, and just it's so catchy that stupid people share memes, that idiots believe all this crazy stuff, And I think that's really quite wrong. I think it doesn't match what we know about disinformation. And it's victim blaming. It's blaming people that have been duped by corporate or sometimes government propaganda. I think it's not a fair way of viewing disinformation to just assume that people are stupid and then focus on how can we teach people to be more resistant to propaganda. It doesn't work that way. Everybody's susceptible to propaganda. Anybody, if you expose them to the same message enough times, will become influenced by information. So it's really the wrong frame, the wrong model to be using to be thinking about disinformation. And I think it's unjust. The way I think, rather than the viral model, the way we need to think about disinformation is the amplification model. You have corporations spending billions and billions of dollars on boosting and amplifying narratives on social media. You have Russia boosting and amplifying information and articles and fake news to influence elections around the world, such as Brexit, Scottish independence referendum, Trump election, the French election with Marine Le Pen. You have a foreign government that is buying ads to support right-wing candidates around the world, and that's legal. We're allowing for money to be used, to be spent to influence our political processes. That's crazy. And it's somehow easier to have that conversation around, should we really allow Russia to be buying political ads in our country? That definitely sounds very bad, but I think we really need to be talking about, why are we allowing harmful industries to be amplifying ads in our country? It really doesn't make a lot of sense why we'd allow gun manufacturers to purchase and boost and amplify narratives, sugar industry, the fossil fuel industry, or almost any industry for that matter. Why do we allow money to be influencing our political debates through amplification? So I really want to get us away from this viral model, because I see it as unjust and victim blaming, and talk much more about stopping the flow by not allowing for this money to be spent. And in most cases, this money is tax deductible. So it's tax subsidies. We're actually subsidizing propaganda that harms us. I don't know the law in New Zealand, but almost everywhere in the world, marketing expenses are tax deductible. And at least in a limited sense, that doesn't seem like a good thing to me. So first, back to the road lobby. I've got a nice diagram down here in the corner by Brigitte Duran, one of my favorites of hers. I want to talk about this post-denialist frame. As I said, for post-denialism, for global warming, for example, it's this idea that global warming will make us happier and better because plants will grow. But you also have post-denialism in the mobility and transportation term itself. Because in reality, we don't want mobility or transportation as much as we want proximity and access. So if I'm a government and I want to make sure that people live in a happy city, to be well, I want proximity and I want access. But the people that are selling motorized transport, the people that are selling road building, the people that are advocating for more low density housing, and single-use land use policies, they want mobility and transportation because those mean contracts. Proximity and access are not as good for industry. So there's a post-denialism to the framing around mobility, the framing around transportation. Transportation means to get somebody from here to there. And to do that better is oftentimes our aspiration, to make it faster. But really, we need to have things be closer to people. So we need to be talking more about proximity and access. And it's fascinating that this is a conversation we're not having enough, to be honest with you. I think we've all quite been duped by corporate framing in this sense, by keeping the narrative around mobility and transportation when it needs to be proximity and access. We have the victim blaming frame quite commonly with the road lobby. I mean, here's the original advertisement from BP when they created the carbon footprint in the early 2000s. But I think it goes beyond that. We've got corporations promoting carbon labels, which we know don't do anything. We've got corporations promoting campaigns like the carbon footprint campaign, informationism, educationism. Corporations are promoting education for global warming, but these are all information environment interventions instead of working on the material environment. So rather, this is a distinction I think we need to be talking a lot more about it. This is a page from my book here on the right. We can influence the material environment, the price of things, such as the removal of subsidies for fossil fuels or taxing fossil fuels, by increasing the distance or decreasing the distance from things. So we could be getting rid of restrictions on density and mixed land use. And we could be using time in a more creative way. We already do that with congestion charging. We charge more money during peak hours for people to drive, but we could also be charging more money during extreme off-peak hours when people speed more often to reduce road deaths, also to reduce emissions. We could be making public transportation cheaper or more expensive during different hours. There's different ways we can use price, distance, and time. All three of those variables influence the material environment, but by focusing on the information environment, we blame the victim. And we never get to conversations about ending subsidies. So this victim blaming frame is very important in this road lobby space. Knotted web, I mentioned this earlier, but you can see a little bit more here how it applies for these kinds of global issues. You've got the European Automobile Manufacturers Association saying road safety is complex. Chevron says that global warming is complex. International Sugar Organization says that diabetes is complex. This kind of focus on the complexity leaves us stuck in the mud. You've got some recent research in the public health journal called The Lancet that has found that really complexity narratives have been weaponized by industry for quite some time, and that they make everything seem so confusing and convoluted, we'll never really find a solution as a result. Farnham Street is a investment blog that calls it complexity bias. We need to be focusing on structure, things like subsidies, the material environment, but corporations are constantly telling us we need more focus on complexity, system, circularity, these kinds of things. And finally, this is my last devious frame, is the multifactorial frame. This was first weaponized by the tobacco industry in the early 70s. Here's a page of a leaked memo from the tobacco industry where they say, I'll summarize this. I only have page 2 here, but the memo overall says, denying the harms of tobacco is not going to be working well anymore. We need to be doing more than that. We should start focusing on the multifactorial hypothesis. This idea that lung cancer is not caused just by tobacco, it's caused by air pollution, it's caused by violent viruses, it's caused by genetics, blame it on everything. And you can see here on the right that Beyond Petroleum, the BP, also used this to create the all of the above frame, which has become very popular in the United States, and through other terminology is also kind of spread around the world. You sometimes hear silver buckshot. And by using this multifactorial frame, you really dilute support for structural action, like political action, like ending subsidies and these kinds of things. It's a very, very sophisticated PR strategy, and I think a lot of people have a hard time with this one and complexity. The other ones are a little bit easier, but this one's kind of become dominant in our discourse, and we don't really realize the long-standing corporate sponsorship of this frame. I need to conclude. I'm moving more slowly than I would have liked, but I want to cover quickly. So now we know the frames. I've gone over these kinds of 9 frames, but even with those frames, why are we not fighting back? And there's a couple of reasons why we're not organizing as humanity to fight back. Firstly, we're being atomized. So the model of civil society action that's being promoted by corporations through think tanks and these kinds of things is to make us be all individuals rather than work in organized groups. So the first way of this is electoralism, this idea that to participate in democracy, you just need to vote. If we all voted enough, we could change everything. But voting is really a very small part of a democracy. If you remember the suffragettes, women got the right to vote by organizing and then demanding political action to give them the right to vote. They didn't vote to get the right to vote. They had to organize and protest and really come together to get the right to vote. Then we have mobilizationism. This is where people believe that you can just protest, but protest without organization is really nothing. Everybody just comes together for a single day for an event they saw organized on Twitter, and then they disappear afterwards. Protest should be an example of organized political opposition or favor for policy change, but they're increasingly seen as organized activism in and of itself. But organized activism is much more than protesting. And then consumer investorism. This is divestment, impact investing, boycotting, boycott. We've got really good meta-analysis showing that these things don't work. Boycotts don't work, divestment doesn't work, impact investment doesn't work, divestment doesn't work. But we're constantly stuck in these narratives. We need political action, but we're constantly trying just to do these other things. And part of it's because these narratives are corporate sponsored. But also, we've got our actual infrastructure of dissent being eradicated around the world. I think New Zealand's really at the forefront of fighting low density laws, laws that have been forcing people to live in low density with forced car ownership for many years. But those laws hinder our ability, they inhibit our ability to organize. The material infrastructure around us has been rigged so that we're less likely to come together as human beings. But then we also have our legal infrastructure of dissent being rigged. Increasingly around the world, you have anti-association laws. So these are laws where charitable organizations that receive tax-deductible donations are not allowed to pursue political ends. This is very important in Australia. This is being fought back quite well by the Hands Off Our Charities Alliance. As an organization in Australia fighting these kinds of laws. In the US, it's kind of a lost cause at this point. 501c3 legislation in the United States has made it so that it's completely impossible in practice for charitable organizations to have political aims. The UK, they have similar issues. India, around the world, these laws are coming into effect more and more. Finally, we're being misled to aim at false targets rather than political action. So we're often told we should protest corporations. But we need to be protesting government to demand that they regulate corporations differently. But corporations do this thing where they promote social responsibility. So they say, you don't need to fight politically. You can come to our gates, protest us, and we'll voluntarily do better. Really, we promise. That's corporate social responsibility, and it's diverting people away from fighting for political change. So rather than fight subsidies, we have protest movements targeting corporations and just asking corporations to do better. But right now we're incentivizing these corporations to do what they're doing. We need those incentives, those political incentives to stop. And then we also are targeting, we see a lot of effort by corporations to promote the idea of the ethical CEO. So you'll often see Mark Zuckerberg go and apologize. So he's framing the problem of social media and the issues related to it as him just doing badly and he could do better next time. And you have a similar kind of thing with politicians and plutocrats and others. I've covered a lot of ground really quickly. I'm going to conclude with this slide and then we'll go into Q&A. My suggestion for how we need to solve these problems, how we need to work together to stop global warming and other kinds of issues related to the road lobby and other kinds of lobbies. My suggestion is that we go back to the basics, the things that have always worked, the way that the suffragettes got the vote, the way that we got food safety laws in the early 1900s, the way we've won against CFCs in the atmosphere that were destroying the ozone. We need to organize, we need to have clear political objectives, and we need to demand change. I don't think it's that complicated, but because our discourse has become so polluted, I think a lot of people don't realize this is how change has always occurred. And we really need to go back to basics. So with that, I'll just asked, please keep in touch. These are my details if you'd like to be in touch with me. And we will now, I think, Frida will guide us into a discussion. So thank you very much for your time and listening to my short presentation. Frida, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Grant. Just wonderful presentation. So what we'll do is we'll ask you if you could raise your hand or throw your question into the chat, and we will work through them. Pip Wheaton, can you share some of the research? We'll go a bit deeper on the comments about divestment and impact investment not working. They're quite different theories of change. Is your argument that they're not effective in a vacuum, or are you saying they're just not effective at all?
Yeah, thank you very much, Frida and Pip. Good question. They're harmful. The model of that theory of change is that individuals, as consumers or investors, by not buying bad things and buying more of good things, can change corporate behavior in a way that makes it so that we don't need political action. So on one level, when they've done framing studies on this, when you make people believe that they're consumers, they are then less likely to fight for political action. So implicit, before we even get into whether or not it works, we know that by framing things as consumer or investor, people are less likely to see them as themselves as citizen and activist, and you decrease political engagement. So they're really fantastic narratives, like in the awful way, and used by corporations to lessen political participation. On whether or not they work, we've got good research on boycotts. We've got good research on divestment, which I cite in my book. So please buy my book. But if you don't want to buy my book, just send me an email, and I'd gladly just send you all the resources. I've got it in there. I would be very happy to do that.
Thank you. I'm just going to keep rolling through these questions. We've got Dylan Cliff asks, in New Zealand, we have no laws around lobbying. Is this a hole we need to plug to even understand how this problem applies to New Zealand?
So yeah, it sounds like you should plug that. That would be great. I completely agree with you. It's a horrible problem, and I don't think it's a plug that's easily plugged. Even when you have laws, you're still going to have influence. You're going to have people influencing politics through any number of ways. Sometimes we can get pedantic. What is lobbying? And then you narrowly define it in a very legalistic manner, and then you only target that. But lobbying and political influence is quite broad. You would really need to ban all corporate advertising to really do well on that. Because you're always going to be having lobbying by influencing the citizenry. But I think before we get to that, though, we should definitely stop subsidizing marketing. Would be my thing. Like, why is marketing tax deductible in New Zealand or anywhere?
I love that answer. I'm going to keep rolling. Rob Cousins asks, if people are deorganized, what tools, structures, and people help to organize around to create change and build people's agency? So you might be able to see that in the chat, Grant, and you've just disappeared. But there you go.
My battery died, so I had to move and plug in. That's a great question. I think that's something we really need to think about subtractively. We really need to look at what are people doing now that doesn't work. We have a lot of people that are really inspired to take action. And because organizing is hard and you've got all of these other things that don't work that are easy, people do the easy fake nonsense and they don't organize. So we need to get people to stop doing all the stuff that doesn't work. We need to stop the focus on divestment. We need to stop the focus on individual action. We need to stop the focus on impact investing, on boycotts, corporate protesting rather than political protesting. We need to really get people that care to stop doing the things that are distracting them so that all that's left is the things that work, which is political organizing. I think that even though it's quite hard and people are disorganized, you have so many people that really do care that if you're able to show them that there are a list of things that absolutely don't work, but if you really do care, you could be organizing, I think we'll have a lot more participation in organizing. I
love that. And I know that Bridget talks about that concept of people caring. So we've got Alex and then Bridget and then Aria. So Alex, I see you've got your hand raised patiently.
Kia ora, thanks, Frida. I'm also really interested in how you see the politics being powerful and, well, actually owning the problem enough, because I feel in all the experience I've had, there's a real precariousness about politics and politicians' ability to make real change where we need it to, given that so much of their, the voter mandate is going to be highly sensitive to, what they see as a tax on their lifestyles, especially surrounding their car dependency. And how do you see us framing these political movements so that it's not going to, end up with that dichotomy or that weakness of politicians, basically?
I think great questions that hit the nail really on the head. I think the first element there of how the politicians not really taking action on these kinds of issues, they never will. They never will. It's not how politics happens. And this is the model that I was kind of referring to earlier of electoralism. The belief that we just elect people and then they'll do the right thing is not really how political change occurs. You need sustained and organized movements constantly pressuring politicians. One way to think about this is, in the absence of us organizing and pushing on politicians, we are always going to have behind the scenes the road lobby there pushing. And so if we're not a counterforce to that, the politicians are going to do where they're pushed to do things. And right now they're being pushed to reframe debates to make it so that like car dependency sounds good. But another element that you said there is like people aren't going to want a tax on their lifestyle. Those weren't exactly your words, but like people don't want like an increased burden. And it's unfortunate that that's how 15-minute cities and these kinds of things are being framed, because in reality, no one's saying we need to get rid of cars. I mean, maybe Bridget and I on a rough day, but we're not actually like actively saying that. What we're saying is like we need to stop subsidizing new infrastructure for motorized transport. We need to stop building out, and we need to stop banning walkable cities. Right now, it's illegal. So we're not talking about take away somebody's car. We're talking about like taking away the prohibitions on walking. And I think that's a way better framing. It's tough at first to be the one pitching that and thinking subtractively. But if we do think subtractively, I think we have a much better argument and case to be made that can really win in these kinds of political debates and getting people angry. We need people to be angry. Why is it illegal to build a walkable community? That's so messed up. Why are we talking about transport when we should be talking about access? That's the kind of reframing that needs to happen. I hope I answered your questions, Alex. I kind of went out there.
Bridget Doran's question is up next. Bridget, do you want to read that out?
Yeah, but I've got 7 other questions now. I've just built on what Alex was saying and what you were saying, Grant. Nice to meet you, by the way. Hi. About we need people to be angry. We also need people to have the energy to keep calm and carrying on, because this is going to get harder and more urgent before it resolves, if it does. So with that in mind, I like your slide that I'm looking at now on groups, alliances and coalitions as part of the movement. And I wonder if you've got any key advice for how we go, because I'm keen to work with Frida on just jumping in, let's do that, and have more of a collective voice. What are the common pitfalls that you might see in going about that? Because I think there's some, like the degrowth movement in New Zealand, for example, has some real tensions within itself about how you define these things, what the most important next step is, where do you put your energy first, that kind of infighting. How do we best avoid that stuff to get good outcomes, do you think?
So your question is like, how do we avoid the infighting with all of this, and how do we kind of work together much better? I think part of this, we often call it like coalition building. Part of the problems that we have with coalition building is just an issue of sheer numbers. We don't really have enough people participating on a regular basis. We don't have enough people seeing other human beings on a regular basis. And I think a lot of that is really, we've got a built environment that inhibits us from organizing at the most basic levels. In the United States, there was a report that was released last week that I think is very much I suspect is the results of it are mirrored in New Zealand and Australia and Canada because you have the same built environment problems. The report found that adult citizens of the United States see friends 25% as much as they did in the year 2000. That's crazy. That's such a dramatic reduction in the amount of time we spend with our friends that I don't know how to attribute it to anything other than just incredible growth of sprawl in suburbia and single family homes. I think people don't hang out enough. I think that's the underlying issue. So then when you're trying to do coalition building in an environment where you've got a really limited number of people engaged, I think it's going to be challenging. I mean, there's some really good literature on how to do this coalition building and this kind of work. Rules for Radicals is the most famous one, but I think a better book is Jane McCleavy's There Are No Shortcuts. I think that's probably the best book I've ever read as a resource for how to do coalition building and organizing. Really quite incredible. And I cite a number of similar books in the last chapter of my book. I can send you some more stuff on it. But I think, Bridget, your question is hitting a very practical and real problem of once you get into the mud, now how do you do it? And I think you just have to stay in the mud and you have to keep going. And I think that's why, back to your point of we have to be ready for the long haul is such a good one. This is not going to be something easy. And then going back to my point, I think to keep people going on the long haul, we need to keep them distracted from the nonsense. We need to keep people away from divestment. We need to keep people away from individual action, techno fixes, things that protesting at corporations or banks. These things don't work. We need to be clearly focusing on political action. Thank you. I think I'm taking up a lot of time.
No, we would have you all day for a conversation if we could. So Aria Franklin, who works here at Greater Wellington Council, her comment is, "Hi Grant, I really enjoyed your presentation. I work on the climate change carbon emissions reduction project." So she's responsible for this regional emissions reduction strategy. And she says, "I often hear suggestions that community or individual behaviour change is an important part of the solution." What are your thoughts on this, given your comments on victim blaming and information campaigns?
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Aria. That's a really good question, one I get a lot, and one that I have a rather depressing answer for. The individualization of public sector problems is a classic strategy. The distinction between what I call like information environment solutions, where you change the information around a person and try and see if their behavior change, and then material environment solutions, where you actually change the built environment, the cost of things, the time it takes to do something. This distinction goes back philosophically, to Max Weber and Karl Marx, where you have this debate between materialism and idealism. And we don't accept idealism in science anymore at all. It's considered nonsense. It's like, yes, we could go to the moon if only we prayed hard enough, versus we can go to the moon if we build a machine, which would be the material solution. But somehow in activism and in social sector spaces, we still lean on these information solutions, these information idealistic beliefs, but they don't work. They just don't work. I mean, food labels don't change calorie consumption. Carbon labels don't change people's carbon consumption. Alcohol labels don't, when you see like the pregnant woman on the bottle, these things don't, they're not solving the problems that we have at hand. And we know that the carbon footprint was weaponized by BP. These things, they're malevolent. But more to the evidence base behind what I'm saying, we've got really good evidence that these media campaigns don't change behavior. I mean, these individualized efforts don't change behavior. We also have really good evidence, and it's quite scary, that people that are exposed to narratives that suggest that their individual actions matter are less likely to participate politically and support political action. And you might think, but not me. Oh, but not me. I really care about the environment, da, 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 da. Well, maybe not you, and it doesn't actually matter. You don't need large margins to change these kinds of political results. You only need a small margin of people to be influenced. Case in point was the 2021 Swiss referendum for the Paris Climate Accords. This referendum lost. Switzerland did not pass the Paris Climate Accords. It lost by like 2%. So in that case, if you think you've got 50 years of recycling campaigns and BP sponsored, remember to turn the lights out campaigns and stuff, it's very easy to understand that that was a huge influence on making it so that Switzerland didn't join the Paris Climate Accords. All you needed was 2% there, and we could have had things go the other direction. So in my book, I cite, again, a lot of resources on this. If you'd like to email me, I could just email you a copy of whatever you would like, or we could continue to talk about it offline. But great and very important question.
That's a really rich answer. I love that. It's really valuable. So I'm just squeezing as much out of you as we can in this hour. Michael Roth asks, how do we overcome the power of the advertising spend, e.g. auto and oil industry, that focus on positioning cars as the ultimate and inevitable solution to a wealthy society? And I think you've kind of touched on things on this already.
Thanks, Frida. Thanks, Michael. I think the focus could go on forever, and that wouldn't be a problem, except for the fact that we're subsidizing car infrastructure. So people that are walking are subsidizing people that are driving. And the advertising that you're mentioning is also tax deductible. So I would suggest we ban harmful industries from advertising at all. That would probably be great. But at the very least, why are we subsidizing them? I think that's an easier pitch to people. Why are we paying for that? Why is it tax deductible for people to market unhealthy food to kids? Why is it tax deductible for industries that produce cars which kill people on the roads and pollute our planet to get tax breaks for those slick advertisements? It doesn't seem right. It's just messed up. So I think the way we overcome the power of this advertising is to stop subsidizing it and, where possible, ban it. I think you must have in New Zealand a number of industries which you've already banned advertising for. Like it's probably illegal to say that Nestle's nutrition formula is better than mother's milk. You probably already have some kind of basis for this kind of thing. Why don't we extend that precedent, target the subsidies for advertising and marketing research and PR, and where possible, ban it.
Yeah, I think you're giving us the new narratives, that words that are going to cause people to think a bit more deeply, and question things that they maybe have not even been aware of, making the invisible visible, which is so powerful. So I'm just going to keep rolling on. Gabriela Rojas asks, can you expand on what you mean by it's illegal to build a walkable city? And apologies if I missed that point.
Oh, man, I think I might actually ask Bridget to chime in here a little bit with me, but because you'll know the New Zealand context much better than me. But what you have is laws that require, I'll speak generally around the world, and at least in Australia and the United States, you have laws that require people to build yards in their front of their houses, on their sides of their houses, on the backs of their houses. You have laws that require people to build parking spaces inside their houses and in front of their houses. You have laws that require parking to be built in front of the road. You have the laws that require 4-lane roads as a default in front of people's homes. You have laws that ban mixed use. So it's illegal in a lot of people's houses to build a shop, a bar, a pub, a restaurant, a coffee shop, a bookstore. These laws spread people out and make the accessibility of our communities go down to really crazy extents. I mean, you have some people that say, I don't know about New Zealand, but that Australia isn't really an urban country because the cities in Australia are just so low density. I think they're the least dense in the world. That they almost don't count as urban, like they would count as countryside in many countries. Bridget, forgive me for calling on you, but I know you know this stuff very well.
Yeah, so Peter's just replied in the chat to say, essentially, slowly we're getting better laws around urban planning that mean that we can build more density, particularly around high-frequency public transport corridors, but they're quite slow to be taken up, and they face a lot of objection at local level from local politicians who think that people want a 2-car garage and blah, blah, blah. So it's challenging here as well, quite similar to Australia in terms of the outcomes.
Thanks a lot, Bridget. I hope that answered the question.
Just chip in? I was just going to chip in and say that we've recently, a few years back, adopted minimum, dropped the minimum parking requirements that we used to have. But we're now like facing some, challenging things through our supermarket monopolies, being the largest traffic generators in the area. Yeah, just hoping one day we have maximum parking requirements. That's the next step, I think.
Huge congratulations. I've been following what New Zealand's been doing around parking and land use planning reform with a lot of interest. I think you're at the forefront. I don't know of any other country that's so openly fighting for this problem. As Alex and Bridget underscored, it's still a huge problem. But compared to everywhere else I know, New Zealand's the only place making any traction. So really huge congratulations.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the time. I'm aware that we're heading on 2 o'clock. So I know some people are going to have to go. And if I have missed your question, I apologize. Use the raised hand or throw it into the chat. There's a lot of comments in the chat. We had some comments from Peter, which is kind of an interesting, slightly more philosophical question maybe, regarding these 9 devious frames, which I think I can't unlearn now. So I'm pretty powerful stuff. And this actually touches on a question that my partner, Rob Cousins, had around, is there a war inside PR right now? Which I think we know the answer. But are these harmful frames currently actively being pushed by people who benefit from them? Or B, are the frames kind of self-perpetuating by people internalizing them by osmosis from our culture? And I guess it's a bit of both and.
Well, this is a great question, and it goes back to what I commented on the viral versus amplified model. I don't think we're ever going to get anywhere with the virus model. I think whether or not it's true, to the extent that it's true, we're all going to have a crazy uncle for the rest of our lives, or their lives at least. We're not going to reduce that. And we know very well from framing research that anybody can be influenced by any narrative with enough repetition. So me, you, anybody. So the problem is the amplification. We're not going to do anything about the culture. That's not something that you can target for any kind of social issue. The way you change culture is you change narrative amplification. Culture is not the problem. The billions of dollars spent every year to boost carbon footprint campaigns, to boost and amplify these narratives is huge. I mean, if you work in marketing or PR, you're all the time, you're buying campaign boosts on social media. And I don't think most people understand that. Like, they think they see something on their news feed and it's because they've liked something earlier. But it's much more likely that a large company is paying for that information to be appearing on your news feed. Yeah, the money is the issue here.
Which maybe brings us around to when you're in the line of work that you're in, you might start out as a scientist, but you end up becoming a bit of a philosopher and a psychologist and a sociologist as well. And maybe we're starting to see that we've all got to tap into our inner psychologist communicator to be part of the solution. Looks like I'm sure there's a lot of people itching to ask questions, but we'll send links around. So question, it's nearly that topic that actually Bridget touched on in her webinar around why is it that some people care and some don't. And we talked about that point. I wondered if you wanted to speak on it around being right versus being open or coachable. Do you want to touch on that a little bit with your line of work around maybe how it feels really good to be right, but can we encourage people to enjoy the feeling of being, more curious or looking for the better solution as opposed to just looking to confirm what they already know?
Yeah, I think that's like a huge philosophical question. You and I were talking about this a little bit, and I really think if we could get people to feel happier when they find out that they're wrong, that would be great. I think a lot of people have beliefs not because they've thought about the logic behind the beliefs, but because the groups and others around them have told them that that's the belief they should have. And that's just in the nature of being human, I think. So the more we can get, when you have education systems that are not about rote memorization, the more we can get people thinking critically about everything, the more that we can, sometimes people say, unsubmerge the frames, like it really externalize these kinds of frames, identify them, codify them. That helps a lot. And also I think we can make people aware of just how malleable their brains are to exposure to messaging. I think that helps a little bit. But I don't really think that we'll win but with the approach of trying to help individuals become more resilient to propaganda. I think that's the viral framing of disinformation. I think we really need to go upstream to the sources of this amplification. It's the money. And thinking in this direction really takes you to like critiques of capitalism and all this kind of stuff. You can go there if you want, but at the end of the day, it's corruption. We're allowing for unlimited amounts of money to be spent on messaging that influences our political perceptions. And why are we doing that? It doesn't make any sense. And it's hard to justify from an ethical lens, I think. Once you know how advertising affects your political perceptions and influences a national level, population level political thinking, it just becomes crazy that it's legal to do this kind of thing.
That is a whole nother webinar, isn't it? And maybe that's something that we can make happen. I mean, I could keep talking all day. It looks like there's no final questions. People are welcome to email them through. I've just put the link to Grant's book in the chat on Amazon. And exciting news for those of us who like to listen to books on our commute, which will hopefully be getting shorter and more accessible. Grant has just finished the audiobook, which I'll send a link around if we can access it. And I'll send a link to Grant's LinkedIn and Twitter page. Are you just Grant Ennis on Twitter, or
Ennis Grant? Somebody, a 15-year-old footballer beat me.
It's always the footballers. Well, I just want to say a huge thank you for your time, your energy, and all the hard work that's gone into your book. And just keep doing what you're doing. It's a real honor to host you. I look forward to keeping in touch.
Honor to be with you guys. Thanks a lot, Frida. Thanks everybody.
Thank you so much, Grant. Good to see everybody. Thank you.